So, so far we have covered how to set up HDFS, and I have covered the coreset.xml and hdfs-site.xml files also. Those are the ones which will have the parameters, and on top of that, parameters which will control how HDFS will behave in the cluster. Okay. On top of these two, there are a couple of additional parameters as well. One is Hadoop-env .sh, which will control the memory settings and environment variables, etc. Okay, and then there is one more called log4j.properties, and this will actually control the logging related parameters. We will understand the relevance of those things once we start discussing about validation, files and logs, etc. Okay, so before actually getting into further details, first we need to validate whether our cluster is set up properly or not. And validation happens at different levels. One is to see whether the daemon process are running or not. We have seen using Cloudera Manager as well as the command prompt as part of the last class by running ps-ef pipe grep data node, grep name node on the relevant instances on which Hadoop is configured. Okay, just a moment, let me start the cluster so that we can use it for demonstrations later. Okay, now I will continue. So validation we have seen at the process level, whether everything is set up properly or not. And the second level of validation is actually whether we can use the service or not. In this case, the service is HDFS. The purpose of HDFS is to store data in distributed fashion. That is the purpose of HDFS, right? So now we will try to use this and try to load some data to validate. So I am connecting to the cluster. I have connected to the gateway node, and from here I will be issuing the commands to make sure that we are able to copy data into HDFS. Okay, I'm seeing if there is a file. So there is a 4 GB file. You can use this command called du, or actually you can also say ls minus ltrh and hit enter. You will see it in readable format. H stands for human readable, and this these can be used in multiple commands, not only with ls. For most of the Linux commands, when you use h as one of the control argument using hyphen, it will means that it will get the information, especially the size of wherever the size is in context, it will actually generate it in readable format rather than in bytes. So this deck-of-cards.txt is 4.3 gigabytes, and also you can run du command also with h. I am giving another example. Okay, and du will actually show us the disk usage, and the current directory is represented by dot, and it is 4.4 gigabytes. Okay, so understand the relevance of h. It will help you many ways when you have to deal with Linux. So now we will try to copy this file, deck-of-cards.txt. To copy this file, we need to have a file system in HDFS. If you are familiar with Linux file system starts with root directory. That's why whenever we say pwd, wherever you go, it gives the full path of the directory where we are in. We are under /root, and in this case, this slash stands for root directory. Okay, so even HDFS starts with root directory, and the way you can interact with HDFS is by running by command hadoop fs. Hadoop is the main command related to Hadoop, and fs in Hadoop is subset of commands which interact with HDFS to create files, to create directories, etc. If you type Hadoop fs and hit enter, it will list all the relevant commands here. Okay, I will not be covering all these commands here. If you want to understand, again you have to go to my channel. Okay, there is a playlist called HDFS itself. I think the playlist is called as Hadoop Distributed File System. You can search for it in the search bar. You can see this, and you can look into the full playlist, and here you can see all the commands in order, starting from help. Help is the first command I have shown, but rest of the commands are in order: append to file, cat, checksum, ch, change group, change mod, etc. So you can watch these videos to actually understand the HDFS commands, and you play with it. Even without watching videos, if you are from Linux background, it is very easy to explore these commands. The main thing you need to understand is Hadoop fs-help, and give any of these commands, and it will give the details about that command. In this case, first we have to understand how to list the files. As in Linux, ls is the command of within Hadoop fs to list the files, but the way you run Hadoop ls of HDFS is by using Hadoop fs. Okay, and here you can give Hadoop fs-help ls, and it will show you how to use it. So Hadoop fs -ls -d for directories, -h for human readable format, -R for recursive to recursively show the details. If you are from Linux background, if you just run ls command, it will show the files like this. Okay, it will not show any details. If you want to get the details, you have to say ls-l to list the details, L for list, T for time, and R for to sort the files in ascending order. Okay, ascending order by time. So here you can see that the last file is on June 30th, which is the latest one compared to everything else. Okay, so to get the details in more readable format in Linux, you have to use ls-ltr. But when it comes to Hadoop fs-ls, it itself is ls-ltr. Okay, it behaves like ls-ltr in Linux, where it will actually provide the details about all the files, even though you don't pass any of the control arguments. And ls command in Linux have almost 20 or 30 different control arguments, whereas HDFS is only having 3. One to list the directories, another H for to give the size of the files in readable format, and R for listing the files, listing the directories and files in the recursive fashion. Okay, and as I have mentioned to you, even in HDFS, the file system starts with / and hit enter. As of now, there are 2 directories, /tmp and /user. These will be created automatically when you actually added service with Cloudera or Hortonworks. In both cases, you will see at least these 2 directories. Whereas if you try to use plain vanilla Hadoop, it will not create those directories. Once you set up HDFS, you have to start creating the directories by yourself. Okay, and here you can see under / it is listing these 2 directories and also listing the properties of the files. And here you can see the permissions for the owner, group, and others. So if you are from Linux, you will understand very easily. If not, these permissions are for owner, which is HDFS in this case. These permissions are for all other users in group called supergroup in this case. So all other users in supergroup other than HDFS, if he is part of that group, have read and execute permissions, and then everyone other than the owner and the members in the group assigned to the directory, all other users will have only these permissions, read and execute. Okay, so these are permissions on the files. These are owner and group. And now if you run Hadoop fs-ls/user, you will see the contents of it. So there is a directory called history, hive, hue, which are not relevant at this time. The most important is root. Okay, so we already have a directory called root, and if you observe, the directory name, the owner and the OS user all are same. If all are same, that means this OS user root on this gateway node have user space. So logging in as root onto any node for which they have that node have access to the Hadoop cluster, he can actually use this user space because he is the owner. The OS user root is the owner of this directory, and he can copy the files into that location. And then you can actually run Hadoop fs-ls/user root to see what are all there in that location. So I have all these files created in this location. Okay, if the user space is not there, then you have to run the command Hadoop fs-mkdir/user/root as a super user of HDFS, and that super user is HDFS itself. So there is a OS user called HDFS. So the terms are a little bit confusing. There is a OS user called HDFS, and we are actually talking about HDFS itself. Okay, so if you want to take care of anything as super user in HDFS, you have to perform those actions as user HDFS, like root in Linux. Root is the super user in Linux. Similarly, HDFS is the owner of the HDFS file system, or he is the super user who can do anything in the HDFS. All other users does not have the privileges which this OS user HDFS will have in HDFS, Hadoop Distributed File System. Okay, so if you have to create a user group, you have to run Hadoop FS commands such as mkdir, chown, etc. using the user HDFS. So it will look like this. So let me create a user here, dgadiraju g Hadoop. So I have created user dgadiraju here. Okay, and now if I do sudo su-dgadiraju, I have logged in as dgadiraju here, or let me create it as itversity rather than dgadiraju, it will be better. Okay, user add itversity-g Hadoop. If I do sudo su itversity and Hadoop fs-ls/user/hit enter, it will show the same users which we have: user root, user hue, user hive, user history. If I try to copy files to any location other than user history, where everyone have read, write, execute permissions, it will not allow. Okay, so to have a user space for itversity, typically in projects, we will create functional users like this. We will create a functional user and we will create a user space for him, and that functional user will only load data into the directory and subdirectories owned by that functional user. Okay, in this case you can visualize this itversity as the functional user, and if I want to copy any files into HDFS, it will not let me to do so. So for that I have to sudo -u HDFS. So this is the way you can actually invoke commands as user HDFS. Okay, or you have to do sudo su-HDFS to connect to HDFS and run the command. Either you can do that, but this is much better way to run individual commands. In this case, using HDFS as user, Hadoop FS -mkdir /user/itversity and hit enter. Okay, this user is not okay. I logged into itversity. I will not be able to create an itversity because itversity is just added and he don't have any permissions on this. So now I am as root. Root is a sudo in Linux. So I am running, even though I logged in as root, I am trying to run this command Hadoop FS -mkdir /user/itversity as HDFS. So this sudo -u HDFS will let you to run commands as a particular user. Okay, so I am copying this one. It is created. Now I want to change the permissions on this directory to create a user space, otherwise it will not work. It will not work for itversity to copy any files into that location. Okay, now we have created the user space for OS user itversity by creating directory itversity under /user and changing owner itversity for that directory. So the first command is make directory command and the second command is change owner command. And then I want to create a soft link for deckofcards.txt under user itversity, home itversity. So this is the home directory in Linux for itversity user. Okay, so that I can actually use Hadoop FS command as itversity to copy into HDFS. Okay, now we will see the magic of how to copy files into HDFS from the local file system. For that, I am logging in as itversity ls-ltr. So there is a one minute. I think I unlink user itversity home itversity deckofcards.txt. Okay, now ln-s deckofcards.txt home itversity I don't know why it is not working. Probably I will just copy the file. Okay, so what I will do is I will just copy the file deckofcards home itversity deckofcards.txt. It's a 4 GB file, so it will just take a moment to copy this file. It should not take that long. I'm not sure why it is taking a very long time. There is enough space. Yeah, it is done. So now I am actually logged in as ITversity by running sudo su -ITversity. Okay, and now I am trying to copy this file hadoop fs -put. So -put is the command which will copy this file into HDFS. So from local file system into HDFS. If you want to look into the syntax, you can say hadoop fs -help put and see the syntax of the command. So it takes three parameters -f, -p, -l. Again, I will not be covering those things here. These three are control arguments for put, and then it takes two parameters. The first one is local source, which means you have to give the path in the local file system, and the second parameter is the destination, which is in HDFS. Okay, so we can run hadoop fs -put. The local file system is /home/ITversity decofcards.txt. You can give relative path also, but it is a good habit of using fully qualified path, because once we learn the commands, if you want to develop data integration platform, typically the code should be deployed from one environment to another environment. In that case, it is better to and the code include the scripts which actually issue these commands such as hadoop fs -put in a dynamic fashion. So for that purpose, it is always a good practice to use fully qualified paths, even though the relative paths work. In this case, I can actually say hadoop fs -put. This is fully qualified path. Relative path, I am in this directory already, home ITversity. So I can actually say just decofcards.txt. I don't give the fully qualified path. So both are same. In this case, whether you say as local source parameter value, whether you give fully qualified path like this or relative path like this, both are same. Okay, and now we have to give the destination. The destination path starts with /user ITversity, and you can give the file name. If you don't give the file name, it will use the same file which is being copied from the source, and this is the directory into which this decofcards.txt will be copied. So now what will happen is once I issue the command, I am issuing the command on the gateway node. From the gateway node, this 4 GB file will be divided into blocks, and those blocks will be distributed onto the cluster. So if you recollect our cluster configuration, so I am connecting to yeah, I am already in the Cloudera manager. So if you recap our cluster configuration, if you click on HDFS, go to instances, you can see that there are 4 data nodes. Okay, and the file which is being copied, the decofcards.txt from local file system into HDFS, will be divided into blocks, and those blocks will be physically stored in these data nodes. Okay, so the file itself in HDFS is logical. If you try to search for the file decofcards.txt by logging into these data nodes, you will not get it, because it will not physically store with the same name as we are actually storing into HDFS. Instead, the file will be divided into blocks, and each block will get a block ID, and it will use that block ID to physically store into HDFS. This is very, very important to understand. You will understand once I show how it will be stored. It will be clear. Okay. Once it is copied, now you can see the details about the file, which is logical. File is just logical. Yeah, you will understand. Let me show what happened internally. Then you will understand. And then if you have any questions, I will explain. So hadoop fs -ls user ITversity and hit enter. So to list the files, the file names are just logical. Here we have this file decofcards.txt in HDFS. Now if I go to any data node, so as I have explained, the 4 GB file will be divided into blocks, and those blocks will be stored physically into these data nodes. If you log into any of these data nodes and search for that file name deckofcards.txt, you will not see that. The reason is the physical component which is stored in data nodes to represent that file is called as block, and each block will get a block ID, and I will show the details of that blocks in a moment. So when we actually set up HDFS, earlier I have shown how to set up using typical configuration using name node, secondary name node, etc. And we have whatever is the name node, it will have a component called name node web interface, which will be running on port number 50070. Okay, so we can connect to that, and we can actually use the web interface to see the details about the files, how it actually stored in HDFS. So I'll be connecting to name node web interface. Again, I have to use tunneling here because it uses private IPs internally. Okay, and also I have to enable Foxy proxy, and then I can use the private IP of the name node. Okay, if it is active passive configuration, then you have to use the IP address of the active name node. You will understand what is active passive configuration later. Earlier I have shown you how to create a typical HDFS which will have name node and secondary name node. So pick the IP address of the name node. The private IP address is this one, private DNS is this one, EC2 internal, and port number is 50070. So irrespective whether you use Hortonworks distribution or Cloudera distribution or plain vanilla distribution, by using name node or active name node IP address or DNS colon 50070, you will be able to access this interface, this web interface. Okay, this is called as name node web interface, and it runs on port number 50070, and it will give the summary of the cluster, how many data nodes are live, how many data nodes are dead, etc. And if you click on these live nodes, it will also show what are all the data nodes in the cluster. So you can get lot of details from this as well. So typically Hadoop admins will have Cloudera Manager or Ambari access, but developers might not have access. So you can share the IP address and port number to access details about HDFS. By using this interface, people might not be able to access the actual files in HDFS, but they can get details about the HDFS. Okay, and in this you have a section called utilities, and there is a browse the file system here. Okay, and where is our deck of cards? It's under /user itversity. There is a file called deck of cards, and here you see block size 128 MB and replication 3. I will talk about replication later. Okay, and if you click on this, you can see so it's a 4.3 GB file, and the block size is 128 MB. So it will use this 128 MB block size, divide the size of the file with this. So 4.3 GB is approximately 4.3 GB divided by 128 megabytes is approximately 35 blocks. For each GB, there will be 8 blocks if the block size is 128 MB. As we have 4.3 GB, it will be approximately 35 blocks. So if you click on this and expand the block information menu here, you can see 0 to 33 blocks here, which means there are 34 blocks for this file of size 4.3 GB. And each block have a unique block ID, and this block ID will be unique across all the files in the Hadoop cluster. Once a block ID is given to a block, it will not be reused anywhere. Okay, and then you have the information such as availability. Availability is nothing but IP addresses which have this block. So the file, the 4.3 GB deck of cards file, the first 128 megabytes is in these three locations, 246, 245, 248. Similarly, the second 128 megabytes is under 247, 245, 246. Okay, so the file will be divided into blocks based on the block size, and then those blocks will be stored physically in the HDFS. Okay, that makes sense? Or do you have any question? And also I will show logging into the HDFS, data node where these blocks are physically stored. Okay, so now I am connecting to one of the data nodes. Our data node IP addresses are 245, 246, 247, 248. Okay, SSH. Okay, I know why. So I am connecting to one of the data nodes. Okay, and then to determine where those blocks are physically stored, you need to understand a parameter. For that, you can go to the Cloudera Manager, go to configuration. It is dfs.datanode.dir, datanode.dir if you search for it. dfs.datanode.data.dir or dfs.data.dir, both the parameters. So if you recollect, when we actually set up the cluster, we have given this path, and I have explained that if you have multiple mount points, which means that multiple hard disks on each of the node, you have to give all the you have to mount into different directories, and you have to repeat all those directories mapped to each of the hard disk here. But in my case, I have only one location or one mount point, so I have created only one directory somewhere on the mount point, and I am using that just to demonstrate. But in production, each directory represents a mount point. Okay, so this is the location in which the blocks will be stored physically. Okay, now if I go to DFS DN and ls-ltr, it will have its own way of managing the directories and files, so we don't need to understand the complete logic behind it. The easy way to explore it is, let's go to browsing HDF, means the Namenode web interface. Pick any of the block which is there on 245. So block 0 is on 245, and the block ID for block 0 is this one. You can use this one, and then say find command from this directory -name star. So we are trying to check all the files which have that ID in it, and you can see that there is a file which starts with blk underscore, and there is a meta file. So meta file is only for metadata. You can actually pipe the output of this find command to exargs command and run ls-ltr on these two files to get the size and other details. And this meta file only will have the metadata, and it's very small file compared to it's approximately 1 MB file compared to actual 128 MB block. Okay, and if you see, the actual block have blk underscore prefix and the block ID. So this block 0 of the file deck of cards, the first 128 megabytes of the file deck of cards, physically stored on 45, 46 and 48 as this file. If you log into 46 and 48, you will see that. And the reason why we have 3 copies is for the fault tolerance, which I will explain later. For now, just understand that this is how the files will be stored physically. Okay, Any questions here? Okay, so the purpose of data nodes is to store the blocks. Yeah, so exargs is the, let me finish what I was talking about. So the purpose of data nodes is to store the blocks associated with the files based on the block size in HDFS. So it will store them physically. Okay, and we will understand the purpose of the name node later. Once we go to the replication factor, the purpose of it and all those things, we will understand the purpose of name node in a while. So the purpose of exargs I am using here is, so if you use this command find dot hyphen name and run this, you got the complete path of the file in this location, but it has two files which have the block ID, and we don't know which one is the actual block which have the first 128 megabytes. One way to determine is by looking at the properties of the files, which include the size of the file. So if you want to pass the output of a command into another command in Unix or Linux, you can use pipe and then use another command called exargs. Exargs is a Linux command. After exargs, we will give another command such as ls-ltr. Okay, so this command will be used on top of the output of this find command and hit enter. And now ls-ltr is applied on the output of the find command, and it showed the properties of those files. Okay, for an administrator or even for a developer, these are very, very important tools which will improve productivity considerably over time. Okay, you have to learn many commands like this, not just find and exargs. But just by learning find, exargs and awk, awk or sed, those two are easy scripts. I will come back to that, why I don't use ls-ltr. Okay. On top of these commands, if you understand awk and sed, you can use them to script certain tasks easily, and it will definitely improve the productivity. So why did I use ls-ltr instead of exargs? So if I have to use ls-ltr, first I need to get the path. Without knowing the path, how I will run the ls-ltr. Okay. And yeah, there is one more thing, I think, ls-ltr, I guess, in the current directory, which will show all the directories. In this case, I can run the same command using ls-ltr current and then grep for the file. But if you see here, let me see. So what is the block ID? So if I want to get only the information related to this block ID, I can do this also. Okay, it will give the details, but again here it does not give the fully qualified path. So to get the fully qualified path, I need to understand another control argument in ls, which will give the fully qualified path for each of the file. So in Linux, a task can be done in multiple ways. Find is more appropriate command to find files with a particular string. So I have used find command, and then to get the properties of those files, instead of using another ls-ltr command on the output of the find, I ran one single line code. That's it. You can use this way also to get the details of a particular file. Okay, but to get the fully qualified path, I think again you have to use some other control argument which will give the fully qualified path. Okay, so but find have other properties also. So using find, you can actually get the files by type, by name, by modified time. You can club all those things, So it is very, very powerful. So if you want to find a file, make sure you use find command or ls command so that you get better at it. Anyway, it is off topic. We can discuss about it further later. So that is what files and blocks are. A file is divided into blocks, and those blocks are stored physically on the HDFS. And now we will talk about fault tolerance and rack awareness, which we will discuss about replication factor or replication. So here it is about block size. Okay. Again, these are controlled by parameters in HDFS_site.xml file, and the way you can actually get the parameter values is by just searching for here, searching for the parameter here. In this case, I am trying to search for block size, and block size is 128 MB, and these will be there in CoreSite.xml and HDFS_site.xml files in Hadoop, and block size is explicitly for HDFS, so it will be in the HDFS_site.xml file, which will be deployed on all the nodes in the cluster. If you want to change at the service wide, if you want to use 64 megabytes instead of 128 megabytes, you can modify it here, and then you have to restart the service. All the new files by default will be using this the new block size, and the block size or even the replication factor are at each file level. Okay, once I cover the replication factor, I will show you how to override these things later. Okay, so now the replication factor. So as I have explained, each block will be divided into, each file will be divided into multiple blocks. Okay, let's say I copy the file with only replication factor 1. So here I am trying to, I will delete the file. Okay, sudo -u itversity, I am deleting the file. Hadoop fs -rm user itversity deck of cards .txt. Okay, it should be on the 242, not 245. I am on the data node host. Now I came back to gateway node, and then I ran this command, and the file is deleted. And now I want to load the command again, load the file again with different replication factor. Different replication factor. Sudo -su itversity set -ovi and -put is the command which we want to run to copy the file, but I want to use a different replication factor. To explain the relevance of replication factor, first we will try to understand what will happen if we have only one copy of each of the block. So to override, you can use a control argument called -d, -D. Okay, and then you can say DFS replication. This is the parameter to change the replication factor. If you are not sure about the actual parameter, you can search for the all the parameters related to replication, and here it shows the replication factor is DFS.replication. So -D, you should not have space after that, and then give the parameter name, and then no spaces, equal to, again no spaces, give the replication factor you want to use, and then space. So this is how you can override a parameter at runtime. Okay, so the actual service-wide configuration for the replication factor is 3, but we are overriding it to 1 here while copying into the HDFS. So when I say DFS.replication equal to 1, there will be only one copy of each of the block. Let it copy, then I will explain. parameter file will not be impacted. It will only impact the file. It will not touch the parameter file and it will not modify the parameter file by doing so. So parameters are for the service wide. Here we are actually saying what should be done on this file. Okay, so it will not change any parameters in the configuration files by running this. We are just overriding the parameters that are there in the parameter files at runtime. You can change the block size also. Instead of having 33 blocks, depending upon the block size, the number of blocks will change. So if I use 64 MB, it could be 65 or 66 blocks. You can do that also. Okay, now it is copied, and now if I go to HDFS, here refresh this one, you can see the replication as 1. Okay, and if I expand this one, the availability of block 0 is only on one of the 4 data nodes. Okay, so what will happen if this data node goes down? So if you have to read the file, you have to read the entire file irrespective of the size of it. You cannot just read partial file. Even while processing the data in distributed fashion, even the multiple threads or multiple process the data, it has to process the entire data set. It should not process some subset of the data set. It has to process in entirety. So if 245 node is down for any reason, what will happen? You will not be able to retrieve not only data related to these files, but for all the other files I have in HDFS. There are other files also in HDFS which are being stored in 245. All those will get impacted, and most likely it will impact 60-70% of the data set, because even though you lose only one node, that one node might have blocks for hundreds and thousands of files, which can impact most of the applications. So your HDFS will be in danger. So for that reason, they have introduced a concept called replication factor. If you recollect, I have explained the RAID earlier. So most of the traditional systems which use network file system uses RAID, but big data systems uses replication, which is similar to RAID mirroring, wherein you will have multiple copies of the same data set, and because of that, if some of the data nodes goes down, still your HDFS will be up and running. Okay, so the default replication factor is 3. So on a typical Hadoop cluster, the cluster can support up to failures of the 2 data nodes. If 3 data nodes fail, that means the data which is there on those 3 blocks because of the replication factor 3, on those 3 data nodes because of the replication of factor 3 will be lost, and you will not be able to process that data. So there will be data loss if 3 of the data nodes goes down, irrespective of the size of the cluster. So again, on a smaller cluster like me, losing 3 data nodes out of 4 data nodes is highly unlikely, but on a very large cluster where you have 1000 or 2000 nodes in a cluster, losing 3 data nodes is quite common. And for that scenario, they have introduced a concept called rack awareness. So rack awareness with replication factor can mitigate this problem up to different level. So I will do whiteboarding and explain about how it works. Okay, so first let me explain on a typical cluster. I have to change the okay, so let's say you have data nodes. So typically the way data center will look like is there will be multiple racks in the data center like this, and then you will have CPUs, you will have network switch, okay, let me increase the size of the marker. Okay, and then you will have network switch. So a typical data center will look like this. So there will be multiple racks. So rack spelling is RACK, which is similar to the almaras if you in the Indian term, and they will dump these servers which will have CPU, memory, and storage, and then they will be connecting all these things through a network switch. So network switch will have the Ethernet ports or fiber optic ports, and then all the nodes will be connected to the network switch. Okay, so let's say we set up the cluster. We have 4-node cluster, right? So we set up the cluster on this rack itself. So in this case, if the replication factor is 3, if one node goes down, there will be at least 2 more copies on these 3 data nodes. If I lose 2, there will be at least 1 more copy on these 2 data nodes for all my files. But if I lose 3, there can be blocks of some of the files which are only on these 3 data nodes. Then my HDFS will be unusable. So as I have explained, if losing 3 data nodes in a 4-node cluster is highly unlikely. At a time, probably 1 data node might go down for any reason. Whereas in a 1000 node or 2000 node cluster, on average there can be 5 to 10 data nodes going down on quite regular basis. And in that scenario, having all the data nodes in one rack is risky. Okay, and these racks can be very big. So physically, even though you have many racks, logically we will only configure our HDFS in fewer racks. So let's say I'm opening another file. So you have multiple racks here. Okay. Okay, we have multiple racks here. Okay, and when this 1000 node cluster is configured on all these data nodes, we have to deploy something called rack awareness script. Okay, in that rack awareness script, we will categorize all the nodes in these racks into 2 or 3 logical racks, not physical racks. Okay, so we will say all these IP addresses or all the IP addresses following a particular pattern is considered as one rack, and the rest of them are considered part of another rack. So using that rack awareness script, HDFS is smart enough to split the data to go to the multiple racks. Okay, when it goes to the multiple racks, even let's say we have 2 racks instead of multiple, so many racks. Let's say we have a 2 rack configuration. We have all our data nodes in these 2 racks. So when the blocks are being copied into the data nodes, so these racks will have the data nodes on this. So HDFS is smart enough to copy each of the block on these on these multiple racks, on the data nodes on these multiple racks. So instead of so let's say you have 3 of them here and 3 of them here. When both the racks are up and running, it will always try to copy a copy of block at least on one of the data nodes on these racks. So for example, our deck of cards, the block 0, the first copy will go to whatever data node it decides to go, and then second block it will actually copy to the copy on the data node on the other rack, and then third one will go to the data node on the same rack on which second one is copied. So there is a logic behind that. You don't need to get into the details, but main thing you need to understand is in a multi-rack configuration, your blocks will be copied onto multiple racks, so that even if 1/3 of the rack goes down, because you have 2 racks, and typically when you configure with 2 racks, you will configure 2/3 of them on one rack and 1/3 of them on another rack. Okay, with this configuration, even if 1/3 of the rack goes down, still your data will be intact. Okay, which means that one third of your cluster means one rack. Even if one rack goes down, all the data node goes down in this, still you don't have issues with respect to HDFS. So the rack awareness take it to the next level. Without rack awareness, replication factor can take care of fault tolerance up to the number of nodes equal to replication factor, up to the failure of the number of nodes equal to the replication factor. It can support the motherboard failures, hard disk failures, everything. But if something goes wrong with the network, or if there are more than 3 data nodes failed on that cluster, then your HDFS will be unusable. Rack awareness will try to mitigate that issue considerably. Even if 1/3 of the cluster is not available, still your HDFS is accessible, and also it takes care of network switch failures also. Okay, this is the relevance of the rack awareness. Any question here? If I go to previous whiteboard, yes, these are physical servers. So data node is nothing but a software process. These are, what happened? Oh, 1 minute. Okay, so these are physical racks. Racks are nothing but cases in which you will dump the physical servers with CPU, storage, and memory. And then you will provision these servers with, when I say provision, the SAS will install operating system and give those to you. Once you got those from the SAS with the operating system, you will set up the prerequisite, you will set up the Hadoop on these nodes. And when you set up the Hadoop, you will get the data nodes on this. Till then, you will not have data nodes on these physical servers. These are physical, whereas your data node, name node, all those things are nothing but a software process to support your distributed file system. Okay, so we will take 5 minutes break unless you have follow-up question. Then we will discuss further. Okay. So 5 minutes break. So any questions about the block size and replication factor? Okay, so I think I am running into some issues because of storage, as I have copied this 4 GB file several times. So let me run this command to clean up some space. Hadoop FS -expunge will actually remove the files from the recycle bin. So HDFS also have the concept of trash or recycle bin, where the files will be first copied to recycle bin, and Hadoop FS -expunge will delete it from the recycle bin. So coming back to the parameter files, sometimes the administrators, because you guys are aiming for the administration, the administrator want to control that developers does not overwrite at the runtime. Okay, in that case he can actually say the parameter as final. So if we go to the Cloudera manager, I hope you guys can hear me. Just confirm. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. So if you go to the configuration section of this service, if you search for replication, you don't want the developers to override at the runtime on the replication factor. So you can search for dfs.replication here, and I think you cannot make it final from here. It should let. So in Hortonworks, it will have a lock symbol here. If you click on that, if you enable that, the parameter will become final, and you cannot or developers cannot use -d to modify the behavior of the particular parameter at runtime. Take any parameter, you can define it as final. Okay. In Cloudera, if you have to change those parameters, I think you have to use some concept called safety valve, because it is not letting to change it here. So I couldn't find any lock icon or anything here. So from web interface, I am not sure whether we will be able to change. There is a concept of safety valve in Cloudera, but I am not sure. Anyway, if Cloudera does not allow, it should allow. Let me see. Okay, let me delete this. Switch to classic layout. Okay, service wide. I'm not sure, so I have to Google it. Probably they might not let to change. So there is a question: if I use -D DFS and copy a file, dfs.replication and copy a file with, and if I copy a second file without -D DFS, that's what. -D is only applicable for that command. It does not impact anything in the. It will not change anything in the parameter file. It will just override the behavior of the particular parameter for that command. Beyond that command, it will only get the values that are there in the underlying configuration files, or whatever you have defined as part of -D in the subsequent command. Okay, so it's only applicable to that command. Okay, so so there is no final here, but you need to understand the relevance of final. If you want to restrict, you can use final. So if you go to the parameter files, cd etc Hadoop conf and hdfs site.xml. So this is how the configuration files look like. Okay, so whatever we are seeing in the web interface is actually providing you better user experience by retrieving these XML files and showing you in a particular format. Okay, and here if you want to make a parameter, so if you see the XML file starts with configuration tag, and in the configuration tag there are bunch of property tags. In the and in each of the property tags you have name tag and value tag. And if you want to make a particular parameter as final, you have to add additional tag after value which says final, and you have to set it to true. By default the final is false, you have to set it to true. Anyway, when you are using tools like Cloudera Manager or Hortonworks Ambari, you should not modify the files directly. You have to use the Cloudera Manager configurations only to modify certain parameters. And using Cloudera Manager, how to make it final, I am not sure. But with the Hortonworks, it is very straightforward. You just have to, there will be an option with the lock symbol after each parameter. You just have to click on that, and then it will become final. Okay, that is the relevance of final, which you need to understand as an administrator. It is pretty powerful. Now, after understanding how the files are stored and the relevance of block size and replication factor, we will try to understand the logs, the relevance of the logs. Okay, browsing the file system I already shown. So again, the logs will be at different level. There will be service logs, which will tell you the behavior of how the data node is running, how the name node is running, etc. So those are the logs which are relevant to troubleshoot the issues at the service level. Okay. For example, if data node is not coming up, and if you have to look at the logs, you have to look into the service logs. So you can access the logs using Cloudera Manager and also using command prompt. So to access logs for a given service such as HDFS, I think you can go to quick links, and you can see in the event search, you can look for alerts, critical, all. If you click on all, it will give the events about each of the service. Okay, and these events are again derived from the log files which are stored on the local file system on each of the node in the cluster. So now we will get on to the hosts on which this service is running and try to see where our log files are. Again, first to understand the location of our log files, you have to go to the configuration and know the parameter. So you have to master these parameters over time. Okay, unless you understand those parameters, it will be tough for you to get the information while supporting the cluster in case of issues. So you can check for log.dir. So this is the location for Hadoop logs, where log Hadoop HDFS, and this directory will be there on each of the node in the cluster. Okay, and this parameter Hadoop log.dir is neither from coresite.xml file or hdfs.site.xml file. It is actually from log4j.properties. If you go to the log4j.properties, so instead of so the reason why we are not seeing the parameters properly here is Cloudera manages these parameters in a different fashion. This is the typical location which you need to look into, but when it comes to Cloudera, you have to go to where run. There is another location where the configuration files will be stored for each and every restart. The reason they are supporting this one is, if you see here, there is history and rollback. If you click on this history and rollback, it will show all the previous versions of your parameter files or parameters. Okay, and the way Cloudera manages, especially if you are trying to support Hadoop on Cloudera, you need to understand the internals of the distribution also. For Hortonworks, it will be all the configuration files will be under Hadoop etc Hadoop conf itself, but for Cloudera, the actual parameter files will be in a different location. Okay, and I will show that by logging into one of the servers on which the actual daemon process are running. So I am logging into 172.31.53.245. Here data node is running. So if you go to /var/run/Cloudera SCM agent. So these are actual standards in Linux. Typically, if you want to store anything that is related to runtime, they use var run as the location. To store the log files, they use var log as the location to store the log files. So var run Cloudera SCM agent process and ls-ltr. You can see there are multiple directories. Okay, and each directory have a number to begin with, and after the number, it has the relevant service and the component of that service. So in this case, 322 is the unique identifier for the directory, HDFS is the service, and data node is the component. So var run will actually store the runtime parameter files. This is the standard location for most of the Linux commands. If they want to keep track of the history of the parameter files, they use this location, var run. Okay, anything that is runtime parameters will be stored here. Var log, as the name suggests, will store the log files while the process are running. Okay, so Cloudera SCM agent is the one which will control with respect to Cloudera about these parameter files. That's why it is under Cloudera SCM agent, and then process is subdirectory under that. In this, again there are directories, and you have a unique identifier which is numeric value, and then the service and the component within the service. So in this case, we have to pick the latest one by seeing the latest number for data node. Okay, so this is the path which will give the current parameters which are rendered in the web interface. So these are the parameter files which will be used to render in the configuration section of the web interface. Okay. So that being said, now you have the log4j.properties here. View log4j.properties, and here you can see there is a directory called log.dir which shows the actual location of our log files, which is var log Hadoop HDFS. Okay, so if you change the log.dir parameter in this for data node logs, it will actually change this value internally, and it will create a new directory, and then we will be using that to deploy. So that is the relationship between the web interface and the actual XML files or properties files which control the behavior of a particular component on each of the node. Okay, now we are on the 245. 245 is running data node. If you go to cds var log Hadoop HDFS and then run ls-ltr, here you can see this log file. This actually will give the details about how the data node is working. It will generate the logs and it will store here. If for some reason if a data node goes down and if you don't have access to Cloudera Manager to look into the events or anything, you have to come to this location and you have to look into that. This is not what is the question? The question is this file service log? it is not file service log, it is data node log. Okay, if you see the naming convention, Hadoop CMS HDFS data node. Data node is the component name in HDFS. Similarly, if you go to 243, it will be name node. If you go to 244, we have name node on that. So depending upon the component which is running on this node, the log files will be generated. And if you look into this, it will hardly have any information about the files. Instead, it will have the most of the details about the service. So the first thing it is saying it is starting the data node, and then what are the jar files it has loaded. All the logs that are relevant to bring up the data node is in the beginning, and then when the data node is up and running, there will be certain events that will be happening, like running the balancer, etc. So all those things will be logged here. So if there are any issues in the data node, then you have to go on a particular host. Then you have to go to that host, go to this location where log Hadoop HDFS, and here you can see the logs related to the data node and troubleshoot the issue why this data node is not coming up, and then you can take the necessary action. These log files are primarily to troubleshoot the issues causing to the daemon process, not on the actual files. Actual files also might be one of the component, but it is at the service level, not just at the HDFS file level. Okay. So this is about the log files. The location and the log file details are provided. And if you look into this, once it reaches certain thresholds, these files will be rolled out and you will start seeing the new files. As of now, this is 6 MB. So there will be thresholds based upon time and also based upon the size of the file. Depending upon those thresholds as defined in log4j.properties, this file will be moved to a different file and a new file will be created to get the newer logs. And then let me go to the presentation. Hadoop command line interface, I have already covered that, and HDFS web interface also I have covered briefly. You have to watch my videos related to Hadoop command line interface and get familiar with all the commands. If I start covering those things, it will take at least 6 hours only for the commands. You have to practice by yourself to understand those. Okay, this is done, this is done, this is done, this is done. Files and blocks are done. Rack awareness is done. Now, a very important component, name node recovery. A very important topic, name node recovery. Before getting into the name node recovery, first we need to understand the relevance of the name node. We understood the relevance of the data node. Data nodes are mainly for storing the blocks physically in them. Okay, so when we actually look into the details about a file, okay, using this Hadoop command, Hadoop fs-ls user itversity, where we have copied that deck of cards.txt. This file is stored physically as blocks in HDFS, and that means that a file have block IDs associated with it. Here in this case, there are 33 blocks with 128 megabyte size. So, so those 34 blocks are stored in distributed fashion on our 4 hosts, which are designated as data nodes. So for a given file, we have block IDs and the block locations. On top of that, we also have the properties for the file, like permissions, owner, group, etc. So all this is called as metadata. And unless you access this metadata, you will not be able to get the information of blocks and block locations and the file properties for a given file. And this metadata has to be stored somewhere. that is stored in uh, uh, that is stored and managed by a daemon process called name node. So in this case, the name node is running on 244, the host 244, and it will actually store the metadata in memory. Okay, so whenever you add a file, blocks will be generated and block locations will be generated after file is copied, and this metadata will be stored in memory. Okay, so that when you try to read the data, you have to first access the metadata to understand where the blocks are for your file to process the data. And instead of doing I/O, if we can store it in memory, it will be much faster. That's why they have designed in such a way that all the metadata is stored in memory, and that in-memory component is managed by a service called name node. Okay, so first you need to understand that all the metadata related to files is stored in memory and managed by name node. So if it is only in memory, what happens if the name node crashes? If you are familiar, if you are from computer background and if you read the properties of the memory, memory is volatile or transient. It does not preserve whatever is stored in memory unless you use file system and you have a copy of it in the file system. So if we actually store this metadata only in memory, if name node goes down, we lose the metadata and we will not be able to map the files to blocks and block locations. For that reason, on top of the, that's where the name node recovery comes into picture. So how to address this name node recovery? If the metadata is only in memory, if it crashes, we cannot recover. That's why they have introduced two file structures, and those two file structures are called as edit logs and fs image. And these two file structures are the ones which will take care of the recovery, name node recovery. Okay. So what is this edit log? So as and when there is a change in the metadata, it will be logged into edit log, which is nothing but a file structure. Okay, so all the logs, since we start setting, we start the name node, we start HDFS service, and then start adding the files. Whatever the changes that happens in metadata will be preserved in edit log. So this edit log can become huge over time because it stores a lot of information. So that it can be used to recover. So if name node crashes, if we have to apply these logs, which is stored in edit log, it will take forever to recover. The recovery process will take very long time. For that reason, what they have decided is to create another file structure called fs image. So fs image is snapshot of the name node at regular intervals. So every 1 hour or every 1 million transactions that happens in edit log, whichever happens first, those will be merged into the last fs image, which will behave like a snapshot for the name node. So I will whiteboard here so that you can understand in detail. I am creating a new page. I have to choose the marker. Okay. So this is name node, okay, which is nothing but in memory. And then you have edit log and you have fs image. So whenever transaction happens, transaction in the sense it might be creation of a file, it can be movement of the blocks related to files because of the load balancing by balancer in HDFS, or it could be changes in the permissions of the file. All these things are considered to be name node transactions. So those transactions, when it happens in memory, will also be logged into edit log. So when these are logged into edit log, if you only have one file structure such as edit log, it will become very big, and using this edit log to recover in case the name node crashes will take forever. So for that reason, they have created another file structure called fsimage. This fsimage will be refreshed at regular intervals, which will represent the name node snapshot for that at that point in time. So let's say fsimage is created on T1, okay, and then fsimage is created on T2, okay. T1 is, let's say, 10 a.m. and T2 is 11 a.m. So all the changes that happens between these two times, 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. will go to edit log, and at 11 a.m. when this fsimage is started, it will pick the fsimage that was there at time T1, and it will merge this the edit log which is generated between this time, and it will create a new fsimage, okay. And so this, let's say this is fsimage 1, this is fsimage 2, and then the new edit log will start capturing the transactions from fsimage 2, and let's say at 11:30 name node crashes. So what we will do is, or what HD when we actually start the service, it will start in safe mode. As part of the safe mode, what will happen is, first it will restore the fsimage to get all the information that is there till 11 o'clock, and all the transactions that happen between 11 and 11:30 will be captured in an edit logs, and these edit logs will be used to recover the name node, okay. So this is the relevance of fsimage and edit log. You don't need to manage them directly. As long as you configure them, that is more than enough. Again, the location is, you can search for dir in HDFS service, and if you scroll down, there is a directory called dfs name dir or dfs name node name dir. If you log into the name node, so I am logging into the name node, and if we go to this location dfs/nn and ls-ltr, there is a directory called current, and here you can see that all the files are started with edits, and then couple of files with fsimage, okay. So fsimage is created on 137 on July 1st, but edit logs are frequently generated, okay. So it will capture the edit logs between the time range, and then it will apply those edits to create the latest fsimage, okay. So, and you don't need to worry about managing these and all those things. You just need to understand where these are, and you have to be careful that these are not deleted accidentally. Any questions on this one? Name node recovery and secondary name. So now we will talk about secondary name node. So the question is there any default time frame associated with edit logs? Yeah, as I have mentioned to you earlier, there are parameters related to that. One is based on the number of transactions. I think default is 1 million, and the second one is the time. Okay, and default time is 1 hour. So whenever the threshold reach, it will create the fsimage, whichever happens earlier. So for example, every 15 minutes, if you are generating 1 million transactions, then the fsimage will be created every 15 minutes, and that process of creating merging the latest edit logs into the new fsimage is called as checkpoint. Okay, so the checkpoint happens based on the earliest of the thresholds. So now we will try to understand the secondary name node. So so this process of merging edit logs into fsimage happens in memory, and it takes as much memory as you have in the name node, and also it takes a lot of other resources to make it as fast as possible. So for that reason, as part of HDFS typical configuration, we have a secondary name node which will take the responsibility of merging these at regular intervals. So name node will generate the FS image and edit logs as and when the transactions happen in HDFS, and secondary name node, whenever those thresholds have met, whenever checkpoint has to be done, secondary name node will actually read those FS image and edit logs from the name node, perform the checkpoint, merge into the latest FS image, and copy the latest FS image back to name node. In case if name node restarted or name node crashed and rebuilt, when the name node is started in safe mode, it uses the FS image and start applying the edit logs to recover the name node. So secondary name node is just a helper node which will take care of the bookkeeping such as checkpoint. It will not be used as a failover or high availability, etc. So that is the purpose of the secondary name node. Okay, we will wrap up for today after discussing these important configuration parameters. I am reviewing all the parameters which are covered thus far while demonstrating several things. You at least need to have this knowledge before giving the means at least you need to have the knowledge of these parameters to give the certifications and also to face the interviews confidently. But once you are on job, you have to understand as many parameters as possible over time. Okay. So the important parameters are fs.defaultFS, which will give the name node IP address and port number, dfs.block.size or dfs.block.size, which is by default 128 MB, dfs.replications to control the replication factor, which is 3 for fault tolerance, and then HTTP address for name node, which will provide access to the name node web interface. 50070 is the port number which I have shown you. Data node HTTP address is not that important, but in case if you want, 50075 is the port number for the data node, and this is for the name node. This is the parameter which controls the location of our name node file structures such as edit logs and FS image, and this is the parameter for data to store the blocks, and these are the parameters for the checkpoints. So this is the checkpoint directory which will be used on the secondary name node. This is the checkpoint period and checkpoint transactions. Period is 1 hour by default and 1 million transactions by default. Okay, so that being said, that is it for now. Make sure you go through the videos and practice HDFS commands. As part of the next session, we will start with high availability, which is another very important concept with respect to HDFS. Then we will move on to the next topic, yarn. That being said, we have 20 minutes for Q&A, so you can ask any question now before we wrap up for today. And again, you can ask by looking my videos, you can move ahead if you have enough time, and you can ask the questions not only on the topics covered thus far, even on the topics that will be covered in future. And also if you run into any issues, you can bring those issues here and I will try to resolve those issues. So I will wait for a minute, and then if there are no questions, we will wrap up for today. Sure, Ratan, you can go ahead. Go ahead, you can ask the question. So far we are practicing with text files, yes. So you can create image files also. It's a very good question. But the problem is the image files also will be stored in the similar fashion using copy from local, put, etc. but you will not be able to read them or view them using Hadoop commands. So to process, so for example, if you have image files and if you want to do certain processing, you have to write MapReduce programs to do the processing. And if you want to view, you have to port it back to some operational systems such as NoSQL database, and then you have to develop application on top of that to view those images. There is no way you can actually directly manipulate the images using HDFS. It is not possible. Even in your local file system also, you cannot go to the binary files of the images and you can tweak them. It is not possible. You have to use certain tools to process. Similar is the case with HDFS. You can store the images, videos, etc., but you will not be able to watch them or modify them directly. And especially with respect to images, you might run into issues such as too many small files. HDFS is designed for larger files, not for the small files. If there are too many small files, then it is not good for HDFS. In that case, if you want to archive and store the archive files, there is a command called Hadoop archive. You can archive the files and create one large file clubbing many images, and you can store it as an archive into HDFS. And processing APIs should be capable enough to unarchive first before manipulating or processing the files that are part of archive. You should not store images directly which are only few megabytes to few kilobytes to few megabytes. You have to archive them and then you have to store them. So very good question. Any other question? Okay, then we will catch up next Tuesday for the next class. Sorry, yeah, next Tuesday for US time for the next class. Thank you. Bye.